They put a price on my head at the spring council, and by the first cold rains they had dogs to collect it. I ran. A king is not supposed to say that plainly, but I had stopped being a king in the eyes that mattered, so I will say it plainly. I ran, four-legged and bleeding, through the black pines of the sunder with the whole autumn wood turned against me. There was an arrow high in my shoulder that had gone in clean and would not come out, and a second graze along my flank that had opened with every stride until my own blood was a smell I could not outrun. Behind me the hounds gave voice, and behind the hounds came men with torches, and behind the men, somewhere I could not see, rode the one who had sold me, the one who had sat at my own fire and called me brother. I had trusted Havard. That was the wound that did not show. He had been my father's man before he was mine, and I had believed the old loyalty ran in him like sap in a tree. It ran the other way. He had told the crowned packs where the free wolves denned, and he had told them the night I would be alone at the border markers, and he had smiled at me across the council fire the whole time he was doing it. When the arrows came out of the dark, I understood everything in the space of a single heartbeat, and then I was running, and I had been running for a night and a day. A king is meant to fall fighting. I had every intention of it. But there is a point past which the body no longer takes orders, and I reached it at the edge of Larkmore Wood, where the great pines thin out into scrub and the land drops away toward the low country. My legs went. Not gracefully. I did not lie down. The ground simply came up and struck me, and I lay in the wet leaves with the arrow grinding in me and the hounds' voices getting closer, and I thought with the strange calm of a creature that has finished running, so this is the field they chose for me. Then there was a light. It was small and yellow and low, a window in a hut at the very lip of the wood, and I had not seen it because I had not been looking for shelter. I had been looking for a place to make my end. I do not know what moved in me then. Some old animal thing under the man, some refusal. I got my legs under me one last time and I went toward the light, dragging the arrow through the brush, leaving a trail a blind hunter could have followed, and I fell against the door of that hut with the last of what I had, and I heard from inside a chair scrape back. I want you to understand what a wounded wolf at a lonely door means to the people of that country. It means ruin. It means a beast maddened by pain that will savage anything it can reach. It means, if the wolf is what they whisper the free wolves are, something worse than a beast. Any sensible soul bars the door and lets the thing die on the step and burns the body in the morning. I had killed men who thought themselves brave, and I would not have blamed her for barring the door. I lay there and waited for the bar to drop. The door opened. She stood in the light with a lamp in one hand and no weapon in the other, and she looked down at me, a great black wolf, blood-matted, an arrow standing up out of his shoulder. Teeth bared not in threat but in the helpless snarl of an animal in agony, and she did not scream, and she did not slam the door, and she did not run for the men whose torches she could surely see coming through the trees. She knelt. "Oh," she said, just that, soft, as though she had found a child hurt in a ditch. "Oh, you poor thing, what did they do to you?" I have been called many things in my life: the Reaver, the Outlaw King. The wolf the crowned packs frightened their pups with. No one had ever looked at me and said, "You poor thing." No one had ever knelt in front of me without a blade. I lay there and let her put her hand, her bare hand, flat against my neck, and I did the one thing that saved both our lives. I did not bite. "They're close," she murmured, more to herself than to me, glancing up at the torches. "You can't stay on the step, they'll see you. Can you stand?" "No, no, of course you can't." She set the lamp down in the leaves and got both arms around me, around a wolf the size of a yearling stag, slick with blood and shaking, and she hauled. I helped as much as a dying thing can help. Together we got me over the threshold and into the warm, and she kicked the door shut behind us and dropped the bar. And only then, with me hidden and the men still out in the dark, did she let out the breath she had been holding. It was a small place. One room. A hearth, a table, a narrow bed, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the beams, and everywhere the signs of a life spent tending small hurt things. a splint on a fox's leg by the fire, a nest of rags where some bird was mending, a bowl of milk half drunk by a cat with one eye. She lived alone. She lived alone, and she took in the broken, and the whole hamlet, I would learn, thought her mad for it. She thought nothing of the sort. She rolled up her sleeves and she looked at the arrow in my shoulder, and her mouth went thin and steady, and she said, "That has to come out, and it's going to hurt you worse than anything has ever hurt you, and I am sorry, and I am going to do it anyway, because if I leave it you'll rot from the inside. Do you hear me?" She said it to the wolf as if the wolf could weigh it and agree. And the wolf, I set my head down on my paws and I let her. And I did not so much as growl when the barbed head tore free, though the room went white around the edges, and I nearly bit clean through the leather strap she had slid between my jaws for exactly that reason. She worked half the night. She had clean water and a needle and a thread boiled in something that stung, and she had hands that did not shake even when the wolf's flinched under them. And the whole time she talked. Low, steady. Nonsense mostly, the way you talk to a frightened animal, but there was one thing she said that I have never forgotten, that I carried down into the dark and back up out of it. Outside, the hounds came up to the very walls of the hut. I heard them snuffling at the base of the door where my blood had soaked into the threshold. I heard a man's boot and then Havard's voice. I would have known it in my grave, asking, rough and impatient, whether anyone had passed this way, whether she'd seen a wolf, a great black beast, run wounded through the trees. And this woman, who did not know me, who had every reason to give me up and be rid of the danger I'd brought to her door, stood at her own bolted door with a wolf bleeding on her floor behind her, and lied to the king's own traitor without a tremor in her voice. "There's no wolf here," she said. "There's a sick woman keeping to her fire and a fox with a bad leg, and if your dogs come through my door I'll have the whole hamlet know you frightened a healer in the night for sport." A pause. Then, dry as bark, "The blood on the step is mine. I got hairs. If the great hunter's stomach can't bear it, he's welcome to hunt somewhere gentler." There was a silence. I lay very still. And then Havard laughed, that same laugh from the council fire, the one I'd been fool enough to trust, and I heard him call the dogs off, and I heard the torches move away down the tree line, and the last thing he said, carrying back through the wall, was, "Mad Aloan of the wood. Should have known. Waste of a good hound's nose." Aloan. That was how I learned her name, from the mouth of the man who wanted me dead, spat like an insult. When they were gone, she sagged against the door and pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth, and I saw that she had been terrified the whole time, that the steadiness had cost her, that she had lied to armed men over a beast she owed nothing to and had been shaking under the calm the whole while. And that was the moment. Not the kneeling, though that was the first crack, not the arrow, though that was the mercy. It was this, that she had been afraid and had done the kind thing anyway, and had not let the fear touch her hands while a wounded creature depended on them. Something in me that had been running for a night and a day, and if I am honest, for years before that, running from the council's judgment, from Havard's betrayal, from the crown they'd torn off my pack, from the long cold work of keeping 100 cast-out wolves alive in a land that wanted them gone, something in me stopped. Just stopped. Went quiet the way a hunted thing goes quiet when it finally reaches the one place no one will follow it. I did not have a word for it that night. Later I would understand it was the oldest word there is. But that night I only knew that I lay by a stranger's fire, sewn up by a stranger's hands, and for the first time since they had put a price on my head, I did not want to run. She came and sat by me when the danger had passed. She was pale and worn, and her hands were finally allowed to tremble, and she rested one of them very lightly on my ribs over the place where the wolf's heart beats, and she said, so softly I almost missed it, "You're not going to die on me. I won't let you. I've never lost one yet, and I'm not starting with something as stubborn as you." And she smiled, exhausted, at the wolf. "You've got the look of something the whole world's been unkind to. I know that look. You can stay till you're mended. Nobody comes here. Nobody ever comes here. Nobody ever comes here." She said it without self-pity, as a plain fact, the way she'd said everything else. But I heard the whole shape of a life in it, and I lay there hearing it, and I did not close my eyes until she had fallen asleep sitting up against the wall beside me with her hand still resting over my heart. I did not die. She saw to that with a will that bordered on fury. For 3 days the fever had me, and I remember those days the way you remember a river you were pulled under by, in flashes, in cold and heat, in the constant low current of her voice pulling me back whenever I drifted too far. She spooned broth into me a mouthful at a time. She changed the dressings and did not flinch at what she saw. She sat up nights when the fever climbed, laying cool cloths along my flank and murmuring that stubborn thing of hers, "You're not going to die on me. I won't let you." Until I began, in the delirium, to answer her in my mind, to argue back, "No, my lady, I will not, since you forbid it." On the 4th day the fever broke, and I woke clear-headed to a gray rain at the window and the smell of wood smoke and dried thyme, and I lay a long while just watching her before she knew I was awake. She was mending, not me, a shirt, some rough man's shirt, her father's, I would learn, dead these 6 years, kept for the cloth. She sat in the poor light with the garment in her lap, and she was not beautiful the way the crown packs measure it, all cold-cut cheekbones and jewels. She was better than that. She had a strong, plain face gone gentle with attention, and quick, clever hands, and a mouth that looked as though it had learned to be firm, because no one had ever been firm on her behalf. There were shadows under her eyes I had put there. There was gray in her hair before its time, and I would learn later that grief had done that, not years, that she had lost her father to a winter fever she could not break, and had never quite forgiven her own hands for it, and had spent the 6 years since taking in every hurt thing that came to her wood, as though she could pay a debt to the dead by refusing to lose another life. The whole hamlet of Larkmore thought her half-mad and wholly unlucky, a woman alone at the forest's edge who talked to foxes, a woman who'd let her one chance at a decent match go by because she would not leave her animals and move to the low country. They did not come to her when the fever was in the hamlet, they came, and then they went home and told each other she'd bewitched their children well, though it was her hands that had cooled the fever, her herbs that had done it. They took her healing and gave her a name for a curse, Mad Aloan of the Wood. Havard had not invented the insult. He had only picked it up off the ground where her own people had left it lying. I knew none of that yet, watching her mend a dead man's shirt in the rain. I only knew that I owed her my life, and that I did not want to leave, and that both of those things were dangerous. I turned my head, and the movement caught her eye, and she looked up and saw the wolf watching her with a clear, steady gaze for the first time, and her whole face opened like a window thrown wide. "There you are," she breathed. She set the shirt aside and came and knelt by me and cupped my great head in both her hands, fearless as ever, and looked into my eyes, and something passed over her, a flicker, a puzzlement, because there was more looking back at her out of those eyes than a beast should hold, and some part of her knew it and did not know what to do with it. "There you are," she said again, softer. "I told you, stubborn thing. I told you you'd stay." I could have gone then. The wound was closing, the fever was gone, my strength was coming back with the speed my kind heal. I could have slipped out the next night, four-legged, and been over the ridge and gone before she woke, and she would have found the bed of rags empty and thought her wild wolf had mended and returned to the wood as they all did, and she would have been safe. That is what a wise king does. That is what a man who has already brought hounds to a woman's door owes her, his absence. I stayed. I told myself it was only until I was strong enough to travel. That was a lie, and I knew it was a lie, and I let myself believe it anyway, because leaving meant becoming again the thing they had made me, the hunted king, the reaver, the wolf with a price on his head, and by her fire I was, for a few stolen days, only a creature she had saved. No crown. No pack starving in the gorges waiting on a king who might already be dead. No Havard's laugh in my ears. Just the rain, and the fire, and her voice, and the slow, astonishing work of being cared for by someone who wanted nothing from me, and did not even know what I was. She named me, in the way you name a thing you mean to keep. She called me Shadow for my coat and laughed at herself for the plainness of it. You'd have a grander name, I expect, if you could tell it to me, she said one evening, sharing out the last of a rabbit between us, my portion raw, hers over the fire, and she said it lightly, but she looked at me sidelong when she said it, that flicker of unease again, that sense that the beast on her floor was more than a beast. You've a king's manner, do you know that? The way you hold your head, as if you're used to being obeyed and merely choosing not to make a fuss about it, she snorted. Listen to me, talking to a wolf about his manners. They're right about me down the hill. Mad Aloan, she said it lightly. It did not land lightly. I saw where it landed. That was the night I decided she would never say that name of herself again in a voice that believed it, not while there was breath in me. I could not tell her so. So I did the only thing the shape I wore allowed. I got up, and I crossed the little room, and I laid my great head in her lap, over the dead man's shirt she'd been mending, and I let out a long breath, and I stayed there. And her hand came down into my ruff, and she went very still, and then she bent her head down over mine, and I felt something wet fall into my fur, and she whispered, "You're the only living thing that's chosen to be near me in 6 years. Isn't that a thing to weep over? A wolf." And she laughed and cried and held on, and I lay there and let her, and swore an oath she could not hear. I could not keep the truth from her forever. The body I was born to would not allow it. On the 6th night the change took me. It comes with the deep of the moon, for my kind, whether we will it or no. The shift back to the shape we are truly born to, the man beneath the wolf. I felt it building all that day like a storm behind the ribs, and I knew what was coming, and I could not stop it, and I could not warn her. And I lay by the fire dreading the moment she would look up and find, in the place of her tame wolf, a man. A great, scarred, dangerous man. In her one-room hut. In the dark. A woman alone. I have never been more afraid of anything I have done, and I have walked onto fields where the odds were death. It took me near midnight. She woke to the sound of it. It is not a gentle thing. The change. There is no hiding it. And she came up out of sleep to find her fire burned low, and a man kneeling on her hearthstones with his head bowed and his hands open and empty at his sides, breathing hard, naked to the waist and marked all over with the old white scars of a life spent fighting, and among them on the back of his right hand, plain in the coal light, the brand they burn into the outlaws of the crown packs. The mark of a running wolf, seared into the skin, the mark that says this one is condemned. This one may be killed by any man for the bounty. She did not scream. I will love her past the end of my life for not screaming. She sat up slowly with the blanket clutched to her, and she looked at the man where the wolf had been, and I watched her understand, piece by piece, the eyes. It was the eyes she knew. The same clear, too-knowing gaze that had unsettled her from the first, and I watched fear and wonder, and 100 years of fire-lit stories about the wolves of the wood all move across her face at once. I did not move. I kept my hands open. I kept my head down, and I spoke the first words I had been able to speak to her in 6 days, and I made them the truest and the gentlest I had. "I will not touch you," I said. My voice was a wreck. I had not used it in a week. "I will not come nearer than you allow. If you tell me to go, I will go out that door and never darken it again, and you will never see me or my kind for the rest of your life, and no harm will ever come to you from me or mine. I swear it on my dead, and my dead are the only holy thing I have left. But before you tell me to go, I would have you know one thing." I lifted my head then and let her see my face, the whole ruin of it, the scars and the years, and under them the thing she had put there. "The wolf you saved. The one you would not let die. The one you sat up nights for and fed by hand and lied to armed men to protect. That was me. There was never a wolf and a man. There was only ever me. And you saved my life, not knowing I had one worth a price. And you did it out of nothing but a kind heart in an unkind country. And I will not insult that kindness by pretending now to be less than what I am." She was quiet a long moment. The fire ticked. The rain had stopped, and I could hear, very far off, an owl. "What are you?" she asked at last, not screamed, asked, steady, the way she'd asked the wolf if he could stand. A wolf that can wear a man, I said. There are more of us than the low country believes and fewer than the crowned packs fear. We were a pack once, with a hold and a name and a right to it. We are outlaws now, hunted for a bounty, because the men who wear crowns wanted our land and found it easier to brand us beasts than to fight us for it. I turned my branded hand palm up so she could see the mark full. This is what your king's men were hunting through your wood, not a beast maddened by pain, a condemned man with a price on his head. I brought all of that to your door and you took me in, and if you had given me up you'd have been thanked and paid and no one would ever have blamed you. You should have given me up. It would have been the wise thing and the safe thing and I would not have blamed you. I made myself say the last of it. You should send me away now. Every day I stay, I am a rope around your neck. If they learn you sheltered the outlaw king, the law they made lets them burn your house and call it justice. She looked at the brand. She looked at my face. And Aloan, mad Aloan of the wood, who talked to foxes, who had not been chosen by a living soul in 6 years. Aloan lifted her chin and said the thing that told me, past any doubt, what she was to me. You've told me every reason I should be afraid of you, she said, and not one of them is a reason you'd hurt me. A man who meant me harm doesn't sit on my hearth with his hands open, telling me all the ways I could be rid of him. She let out a slow breath. I've spent 6 years being told what I ought to fear. Foxes with the froth, wolves in the wood, my own bad luck. I've been careful and I've been alone and it hasn't kept a single grief from my door yet. She wrapped the blanket tighter and drew herself up, and there was the steadiness again, the thing that had faced Havard down. I don't much care what the crown packs branded you. I care what you were on my floor when you thought no one worth the name was watching. And you were a creature in pain who wouldn't bite the hand that hurt you helping you. That I'll trust. A pause. Then dry, the corner of her mouth tugging up despite everything. Besides, I've already lied to the king's men over you once. Rather a waste to send you off now and have done it for nothing. I laughed. I had not laughed since before the spring council. It came up out of me rough and disbelieving, and she smiled at the sound of it, pleased with herself, and just like that the fear went out of the room and something warmer took its place. Have you a name, she said, or shall I keep calling you Shadow? Werk, I told her, though I'll answer to Shadow, I've grown fond of it. Werk, she tried it. It sat oddly in that little hut, a king's name by a poor fire, and she seemed to feel the strangeness of it too, and covered it the way she covered everything with plainness. Well, Werk, you'll want a shirt. My father's, God rest him, he was a big man, it might near fit you. She rose and went to the chest and fetched the very shirt she'd been mending all these days, the rough gray cloth she'd sat over in the rain, and she held it out to me across the small room, not coming closer, honoring what I'd promised, and I understood that she had been mending it without knowing for me. Cover yourself and come sit by the fire, she said. You've been 6 days a wolf on my floor. The least I can do is give the man a chair. I stayed 11 more days, and they were the best of my life, and I have had since a good and long one to weigh them against. We were careful with each other. I kept my word. I did not come nearer than she allowed and slept those first nights across the room, and it was she who, by small degrees, allowed nearer. A shared meal at the one small table, her showing me the fox with the mending leg, the one-eyed cat, the bird in its nest of rags, and the pride she took in them that she let no one else see. Me splitting her wood, which the man's arms could do far faster than she'd managed alone, and the look on her face the first cold morning she woke to a stacked woodpile, as though no one had ever done a plain kindness for her in return in her whole life, which, I came to fear, was near the truth. She told me about her father, the charcoal burner, a big gentle man who taught her which herbs mended and which killed, and had never once let her feel a burden. She told me about the winter fever that took him, and how she'd sat up 9 nights and lost him on the 10th, and how she had never since been able to let a hurt thing die in front of her without fighting it to the last, because she had lost the one that mattered and could not, would not, lose another. And I understood then why she had opened her door to a bleeding wolf when any sensible soul would have barred it. She had not been brave. She had been unable to do otherwise. Her kindness was not a choice she made. It was the shape of her, worn into her by grief, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever encountered, and I told her so one night by the fire, and she went red and told me not to be foolish, a scarred old outlaw flattering a mad wood witch. And then she looked at the fire a long time and said, very low, "No one's ever called anything about me beautiful before." And I decided again, and more fiercely, that whole villages would learn better before I was done. I told her in turn the truth of what I was and what had been done to us. The Sunder Pack, 100 souls and more, wolves and their families, driven from our old hold in the mountains when the crowned packs decided the land was too rich to leave in outlaw hands. How they'd branded us beasts to make the killing lawful. How I'd led the remnant into the ravines and the deep wood and kept them alive these 3 hard years, feeding them, hiding them, holding them together by will alone. How Havard, my father's man, my own second, the one throat I'd never thought to guard, had sold me at the spring council for a crowned pack's gold and a promise of the wardenship over the very land he'd betrayed us to lose. How the ambush at the border markers had scattered what was left of my pack to the 4 winds, each small band gone to ground alone, none of them knowing whether their king was alive or dead. "They think you're dead," Aloan said quietly when I'd finished. We were sitting close by then, she'd allowed that much, her shoulder near mine in the firelight. "Your people, they're out there in the cold thinking their king is gone." "Likely," I said. It was a stone in me, that thought, and had been the whole time. A scattered pack with no king holds together a season no more. By spring they'll be hunted down band by band, or they'll bend the knee to the crowns to live, which for a free wolf is a kind of dying. I looked at my branded hand. I should have gone back the moment I could stand. Every day I've spent here mending is a day they've spent believing they're leaderless. She was quiet. Then she said the thing that ended those 11 days, because it was true, and she was too honest to let me hide from a true thing, even one I'd rather she'd left unsaid. "Then you have to go to them," she said. "Verk, you have to go." I did not answer. She turned and looked at me, and her eyes were bright, and her jaw was set the way it's set when she was doing a hard thing on purpose. I've kept enough hurt creatures to know the look of one that's healed and staying because it's afraid of the wood, she said. "You're not afraid of the wood. You're afraid of what's waiting in it. And you'd stay here by my fire being shadow and let them believe their king is dead, because here it's warm and no one's asked anything of you and I make a passable stew." Her voice caught just slightly and steadied. "And I would let you. That's the shameful part. I want to let you. I've been alone 6 years and you're the first living soul that ever chose my company, and if I said stay you might and I'd have you, and it would be the most selfish thing I ever did in my life. Because 100 people are out there in the cold with no king, and I know what it is to sit up nights fighting to keep something alive that everyone else has given up on. I won't let their king sit by my fire and let them die. I won't, even to keep him. I have led men into battle. I have held a broken pack together with nothing but my own refusal to break. I have never in my life seen courage to touch that, a lonely woman sending away the one warmth that had come to her door in 6 years, because 100 strangers needed him more than she did, and she was too good to pretend otherwise. That was the moment I stopped calling it, even in the privacy of my own skull, by any smaller name. There is only one word for what she was to me, and my kind know it in the blood, and I had known it since the night the running stopped inside me on her floor, and had been afraid of it, because to name it was to have something the crowns could take from me. But she had just proven she would give me up for the sake of 100 people she'd never met, and I could no longer pretend I did not know what I was giving up in return. "Aloan," I said, "there's a thing my kind carry, a knowing. It comes once if it comes at all, and most of us live our whole lives and it never does. It came to me the first night on your floor and I've been calling it gratitude and it isn't. I took her hand the first time I'd taken it and turned it gently palm up in mine, next to my branded one. You are the other half of me, the one my blood was made to know. There's a word for it and it will frighten you, and I'll say it anyway, because you've been braver than me this whole time, and I'm ashamed to keep being the coward in this hut. You're my fated one. My mate, the wolf in me knew it before the man would admit it, and it will not know another, not if I live 300 years alone in the cold. I closed her hand in both of mine. I have nothing to offer you. A brand, a bounty, a scattered pack, a war I'll likely lose. If you told me you wanted no part of it, you'd be right, and I'd go and never trouble you again. But you asked me if I had a name, and I gave you Verk, and that was true. This is the truest thing I have. You're mine, and I'm yours. And I have been since the moment you knelt in the leaves and called me you poor thing when the whole world was calling me a beast. She looked at our two hands together, the branded and the bare. And then I felt it before I saw it, a warmth spreading up out of the place where our palms met. Something rose on the back of her hand. Not silver, not any jewel color out of a story. It came up dark and clean under the skin like a brand seared gentle, the shape of a running wolf, the very mark they'd burned into me to condemn me, but on her it was no condemnation. It was a claiming. It was the bond writing itself plain, matching her to me, mark to mark. The outlaw's shame turned on her hand to the only crown either of us would ever wear. She stared at it. She looked up at me, and there were tears standing in her eyes, and she said, in a voice gone thin with wonder, "It doesn't hurt." "No," I said, "it never will. It's only the truth showing itself." I could barely speak. "Elowen, I have to go to my people. You're right, and you're braver than me, and I have to go. But I am not leaving you the way a healed wolf leaves your wood. I'm coming back. Whatever's left of me, whatever I can win back or die trying to, it's yours, and I'm coming back for it. Say you'll be here." "I'll be here," she said. "I'm always here. Nobody ever comes here." And then she laughed, that watery laugh, and pressed her marked hand flat against my scarred chest, over the heart, exactly the way she'd laid it on the wolf's ribs the first night, and she said, "Come back, Verk. Come back, or I'll never forgive you, and I hold a grudge like the dead hold winter. Come back." I left before dawn, four-legged over the ridge and into the deep sunder to find my scattered pack, with the taste of her name in my mouth and the shape of a running wolf newly marked on the hand of the woman I loved. I did not look back at the little hut with its yellow window. If I had looked back, I would not have gone. She knew it. That is why, when I slipped out into the gray, she did not come to the door to watch me go. She let me leave clean. Even in that, she thought of me before herself. I swore, going over the ridge, that it would be the last time anyone ever did. Finding my scattered pack took the better part of a moon, and telling that tale in full would fill a longer night than this one. What matters is that I found them, band by frozen band, in the ravines and the deep gorges and the hollow places of the sunder, and that the sight of their king alive did to them what I had prayed it would. It woke them. A leaderless pack lies down to die. A pack whose king walks back out of the grave, stands up, and remembers what it is. By the dark of the next moon, I had them gathered again in the old gorge stronghold, near 200 souls, thin and hard-used and burning, and I stood up before them on the high stone, and I told them the truth I'd learned in a lonely hut at the edge of Larkmore Wood. That we had spent 3 years hiding, and it had won us nothing but a slower death, and that I was done hiding, and that we would either take back a place to stand as free wolves, or we would fall on our feet with our teeth bared. But we would not lie down in the cold one more winter waiting for the crowns to finish us. And I told them about Havard, because a pack that is to fight must know what it fights, and I would not lead them without the truth. I told them their king had been sold at his own council fire, and by whom, and for what. The wardenship of the very land we'd been driven from, the crowned pack's gold in a trader's purse. I watched 200 faces go from grief to a cold, clean fury, and I knew we had a war. But that is the tale of the pack, and this is the tale of Elowen, and the two came back together in the worst possible way, on a gray morning 3 days before I meant to march. A scout came in half dead from the low country with word I nearly did not survive hearing. Havard, warden now, styling himself lord of the marches on the strength of his betrayal, had been made to answer at the crown's council for how the outlaw king had slipped his ambush and vanished. And Havard, to save his own skin, had gone hunting for the thread of it and had found the one loose end. That on the night the reaver escaped there had been a wolf, wounded, hunted through Larkmore Wood, and a woman at the forest's edge who'd stood at her door and lied to armed men over it. Mad Aloan of the wood. He'd remembered her. He'd remembered his own laugh. And he had understood, too late for his pride, exactly whose life she'd saved. They were riding for her, to make an example, to burn the healer's house and call it justice, and to draw me out because Havard had guessed he'd always been clever, that was the poison of him, that the outlaw king would not sit in his gorge and let it happen. He was using her as bait. He was right, too. It was the only bait in the world that would have worked. I did not march in 3 days. I marched in 1 hour, and I did not march, I ran. And 200 free wolves ran at my back, and we crossed in a night and a day a distance that should have taken 3, and we came down out of the sunder onto the edge of Larkmore Wood in the last gray light of evening, and I saw, from the ridge, the torches gathered at her door. They had not fired the house yet. Havard wanted me to see it. That was his single mistake, and it was the mistake of a man who thinks the world runs on cruelty and cannot imagine it running on anything else. He'd gathered his riders in a half-circle before the little hut with its one yellow window, and he'd had Aloan brought out and stood in the cold before them, and he was making a speech of it. I heard the shape of it as I came down through the trees, the words harboring the outlaw and the king's justice, and let the wood learn what it costs, because he wanted an audience, and he assumed the only audience that mattered was the frightened hamlet he dragged up the hill to watch. She was not frightened. That is the thing I will carry to my own grave and beyond it. I came down through the last of the trees at the head of 200 wolves, and the first clear sight I had of her was Aloan standing straight-backed in the cold before armed men with her chin up, and her marked hand closed into a fist at her side, telling Havard, in that dry, steady voice that had faced him down once already, that she'd do it again, that she'd shelter any hurt thing that came to her door and be glad of it, and that if burning a healer's house was the king's justice, then the king could keep his justice. She wanted no part of a world so arranged. Havard raised his hand to give the order. I came out of the trees. I will not pretend there was no fighting. There was, and it was brief and it was hard, and I will not dress it up for a gentler hour. Havard had 30 riders, and I had 200 wolves with 3 years of grief in them, and it ended the only way it could. But I want to be plain that the fighting is not the part that matters, and it is not the part I remember. What I remember is the moment I stepped out of the tree line into the torchlight, on 2 legs, a man, scarred and branded and terrible, and the whole half-circle of riders turned. And Havard's face when he saw me, when he understood that his bait had worked far better than he'd wanted it to, that he had not drawn out a fugitive to be captured but a king with an army at his back, and a reason to be there that no crown could measure. And I remember Aloan's face in the same instant when she saw me. She had been ready to die. She had made her peace with it, standing there straight-backed and unafraid, because that was who she was. She would not save herself by unsaying a kindness. And then the trees gave up their king, and I watched her understand all at once that the wolf she'd saved had come back with 200 more, and that she was not going to die in the cold before jeering strangers after all, and that the man who loved her had crossed the whole of the sunder in a night and a day to stand between her and the fire. Her hand, her marked hand, flew up to her mouth, and she said my name, just my name, across all that torchlit dark, Verk. The way you say the name of the thing you'd stopped letting yourself hope for. The fighting took the length of time it takes a hard rain to pass. When it was done, Havard was on his knees in the mud before his own gathered hamlet, disarmed, his 30 riders broken and scattered or yielded, and 200 free wolves stood in a silent ring around the little hut with its one yellow window, and I walked through them to where she stood, And the whole of Larkmore, the hamlet that had called her mad, that had taken her healing and given her a curse for it, that had come up the hill to watch her house burn. The whole of Larkmore stood frozen in the torchlight and watched their outlaw king cross the cold ground to a woman they'd shunned, and go down on one knee in the mud before her, and take her marked hand in his branded one, and press his brow to it. I said I'd come back, I told her. My voice was not steady. A king's voice is supposed to be steady. Mine was a ruin. I'm sorry I let it come so close. I'm sorry I ever brought them to your door. I'm sorry the price of your kindness was to stand in the cold and wait to burn. I'll spend the rest of my life making certain no one ever makes you pay for being good again. Marry me. Not the outlaw king, I'd give the outlaw part back gladly. Just me. The stubborn thing you wouldn't let die. Come and be queen among the free wolves of the Sunder, where the only law is that no hurt thing gets turned from the door, which I mean to make the first law of our hold in your honor. Marry me, Aloan. Come home. She looked down at me kneeling in the mud, this king, this scarred and branded man, with 200 wolves ringed silent around us and her whole cruel hamlet watching. And she did the thing she had done from the very first night, the thing that was the shape of her. She knelt down too into the cold mud so that we were eye to eye, and she cupped my face in both her hands, fearless as ever, and she said, "You great stubborn thing. Of course I'll come home. I told you the first night nobody ever comes here." Her thumb moved over one of the old scars on my cheek. "You came here. You're the only one who ever did. I was never going to let you go. I have thought since about what the watching hamlet made of it, the mad wood witch they'd shunned, kneeling in the mud with a king's face in her hands, marked with the bond brand, chosen before all of them by the very outlaw king their crowns had taught them to fear. I have thought about how the story must have traveled down into the low country afterward and grown in the telling, and how by now there are surely children in Larkmore who are told, when they are unkind to some lonely soul at the edge of things, mind you don't scorn the wrong one. That's how the healer at the wood's edge came to be queen among the wolves. I hope so. I hope her name is a warning to them now, and not a curse. She deserves at least that much rewriting. As for Havard, you will want to know what I did with the man who sold me at my own fire and would have burned the woman I love. I will tell you, because it is the last thing that matters in this tale, and because it was her doing, not mine. I meant to kill him. I will not lie to a gentle hour and pretend otherwise. I stood over him with 3 years of grief in my hands and every right the old law of the wood gives a wronged king, and I meant to end him in the mud where he knelt. And Aloan put her marked hand on my arm, not to spare him mercy for his sake. She had none to spare him. She is not a saint, and I would not want her one but for mine. Don't, she said low, just for me. Not because he doesn't deserve it. Because you don't. You've spent 3 years being made into the beast they branded you. Don't let him make you it now at the end, in front of your whole pack over me. Let him live and watch. Let him spend the rest of his life a small betrayer in the low country, hearing the tale of how the outlaw he damned became a king with a queen who loved him, while he made himself lord of nothing by selling the only man who ever trusted him. That's a worse thing than dying. Let him have it. So I let him have it. We took his stolen wardenship. The free wolves hold the marches now, and hold them better than any crown ever did, and no hurt thing is turned from our door, healer or beast or branded man, for that is the first law of our hold, and it is written in Aloan's name. And Havard went down into the low country to be a small forgotten man, and lived, I am told, a long and bitter life hearing the tale of us grow, which is exactly the punishment she prescribed, and exactly the reason I will never in my life win an argument against her, and would not want to. We were bound under the old moon in the gorge stronghold, before 200 free wolves who owed her their king and knew it, and she wore no jewels, because she wanted none, only the running wolf mark on her hand, that had been my shame and became her crown. She healed among us for 40 years. She never lost the habit of taking in the broken. There was always some hurt creature by our fire, some mending bird, some 3-legged thing the pack had learned to bring to the queen because the queen would not turn it away. And the mark of that, the true mark, more than any brand, is that in all the years since, the free wolves of the Sunder have been known in the low country not as reavers, but as the pack that shelters. Mothers send their sick children up to us. That is her doing. She turned a hunted outlaw pack into a place hurt things come to be saved, one stubborn kindness at a time, exactly as she once turned a bleeding wolf on her step into a king who would love her past the end of his days. She is old now, and so am I, and we sit most evenings by a fire in a hold that our enemies once swore they'd leave us no corner of, and there is always some small mending creature between us. And I still, on the coldest nights, catch her looking at me sidelong with that flicker of old wonder, as though she cannot quite believe the wolf she saved turned out to be a man, and the man turned out to be hers. And when she does, I take her hand, the marked one, and I hold it the way I held it the night the bond wrote itself plain, and I tell her the truest thing I have, the same truth I gave her on her hearthstones when I was a stranger with my hands open and empty, afraid she'd send me into the dark. There was never a wolf and a man, I tell her, there was only ever me. And you saved my life, not knowing it was worth a price. And she squeezes my old hand in her old one, and she says, every time, the thing she said the first night, dry and warm and unbreakable, the words that stopped the running in me and never let it start again. You're not going to die on me, I won't let you, I've never lost one yet. She never has.